we are at a massive crossroads at the moment in Bitcoin. And I think we cannot be lazy here and just sit back and enjoy the price rising, because it's actually quite a dangerous moment. There is now more than 1 million Bitcoin in the ETFs. There's 400,000 in MicroStrategy. A lot of organizations and governments are going to buy more of that Bitcoin. And so what in 4 or 5 years from now, maybe the next cycle, there's actually 5 to 10 million Bitcoin actually no longer in people's hands, but it's just like in ETFs and others. At that moment, you basically no longer have any on-chain transactions. And you can already see that today. Like if you look at the transaction fee, who would have predicted 10 years ago that the transaction fees would be at this level? So there's basically almost no demand for that sovereign ownership. If 5 to 10 million Bitcoin ends up in ETFs, in central banks and others, what we have created is just a new version of gold. And gold has failed in our current society. But that might be where we end up. What if instead of central banks holding gold, they will just hold Bitcoin? And you will still have all the money printing, you will still have the increased inflation, you will still have all the downsides of the current financial system that we live in. And so I would consider Bitcoin at that moment failed.
Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2. I'm Charlie Spears. Bitcoin Season 2 is about new topics and new faces on the oldest blockchain, Bitcoin. I've got Willem from Botanix Labs. He is both the progenitor of the idea of Spider Chain and the founder of and CEO of Botanix. We're going to talk about Botanix on testnet, but I think more interestingly, we're going to talk about what the future of Bitcoin looks like. It may be at a crossroads for the custodianship of Bitcoin. Stay tuned as we get into that. But first, a word from our sponsor, Botanix. Bitcoin Season 2 is brought to you by Botanix. Botanix Labs is pioneering a new direction for DeFi with the first EVM L2 running on Bitcoin that's built to be forward secure, decentralized, and share gas fees generated by the network with users. See the future of DeFi at Botanix. botanixlabs.xyz. All right, welcome to Bitcoin Season 2, Willem. Thank you so much for having been a supporter of Bitcoin Season 2. How are you doing today?
Hey, Charlie. Doing really well. Going really happy with the testnet launch last week. Made some good progress, so feeling good.
And you named it after one of the most famous spiders of all time, Aragog, from Harry Potter, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're thinking about naming conventions for the testnet, and also for mainnet. We have another famous spider coming. So,
gotcha. And mainnet coming soon, Q1 2025. I think. Fingers crossed. I mean, when did the beginning of like the concept for Spider Chain, when did that start? And then like talk me through the past couple of years to getting this live on the testnet.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I think it's now exactly 2 years ago that I was writing the Spider Chain Whitepaper, which is exactly almost the same time as the ordinals paper came out, or when Casey wrote ordinals. I think a lot of people in the space really felt we had to bring more innovation back to Bitcoin. And basically how the design worked is I looked at all different ways you can basically build a layer 2. And I realized that what we need is a censorship resistant layer 2. I'm a strong believer in decentralization, not in name only, in reality. And so when you look at the design of the Spider Chain, is that it's absolutely optimized to be actually decentralized. Then we raised a small round and actually started building like a year and a half ago. Then we first had a testnet V0, unnamed. Then there was a single node. So basically how you think about any layer 2, for example, on Ethereum. That's a single node run by a single company. And And then now we have testnet V1 or Aragog testnet, as we call it, which is actually the first big step towards the full spider chain. It is basically already a multi-node layer 2, where it basically is spread out across different jurisdictions. And the idea is really to have proper decentralization and proper distribution across the world to actually get that censorship resistance. And now that testnet has launched last week, we actually had way more traction than we expected. We hit 500,000 transactions within 4 days or something, which was quite incredible to see. And now we're here.
You use these terms a lot, censorship resistant, and one of the core messaging points that you have is permissionless. And I think this will become a theme of our conversation here, because I want to throw you a bit of a challenge question here, which is, why should someone use an L2 or a permissionless censorship resistant L2 over a centralized custodian like Coinbase or Binance? Aren't those cheaper? Aren't those easier for users? What's the why should someone not use those services?
I think that's an absolutely great question, and it actually goes back to the beginning days of Satoshi. Why do we need actually a Bitcoin, right? Why don't we just use a traditional financial system? And it's the same thing over and over again. And there's a lot of famous Satoshi quotes about it. You don't want a trusted third party. The moment you need to trust a third party is basically when human nature comes in. And so over time, we see where it always leads to. It leads to money printing. It leads to inflation. It leads to greater inequality in the world. And so you need to build systems where we don't have the human weakness interfering actually with the global financial system and with the money. And so that goes beyond the base layer. I also believe that should be the case on second layers. And so why would you not use a Coinbase? I think that is a very clear answer. The money you have in your Coinbase account is not yours. If Coinbase decides to basically halt your account, that's it, game over. You don't even know if Coinbase has all the Bitcoin. We saw that with FTX. Basically, FTX was just a front end, and there was nothing happening in the back end. And so there is a lot to say, especially as the internet grows beyond governments, that you need a decentralized and permissionless protocol that is open source and where you can basically not have to trust a third party.
So what makes Botanix or Spider Chain permissionless? You don't have to go super into how it works, because it is very complex, I think. But what to the average user, how would you explain why Botanix is permissionless in comparison to other permissioned layer 2 options?
Yeah. So there's a difference between the first steps of the spider chain, where basically bigger node operators will have to be trusted, which is a little bit a liquid trust model. But even then, even with Lightning, if you're using LSP, you also trust those LSPs. And so that will be the beginning phases. Eventually, the idea is that you become big enough where you can maybe have a few thousand node operators, and anyone would be able to join the network as a node operator. And I think that's a great model. It's a similar model that you typically see on layer ones, for example, like Bitcoin itself. You do trust that the cryptographic protocols are secure. You do trust that the miners do not collaborate, for example, or you do trust that there's enough sufficient nodes and being run by people in the world. And so similarly, you basically create a protocol that people could be able to join eventually.
So what, this is a common, I think, market semantics issue that I think a lot of people get confused. I hear a lot of maybe both degens and I would say pretty tenured Bitcoiners conflate the two terms permissionless and decentralized. And they're technically different things. Does something have to be decentralized in order for it to be permissionless?
No, it's completely separate items, I would say. I mean, permissionless also has a lot of different aspects to it. Permissionless basically can mean that you can permissionlessly join the network. And so, for example, if I want to have some Bitcoin on the layer 2, I can join that network, and I will not be able to censor it, and nobody can hold me back from having my Bitcoin, for example, in my MetaMask and use applications for it. No one can stop that. But also you have the permissionless of the network itself. Can I actually operate my own node? Can I actually verify myself what is happening on the network? So already the permissionless has like two different aspects of like the protocol and like the user experience side. And that's totally different from decentralization. Basically, decentralization is how many parties do you actually trust in the whole tech stack?
So, ordinals in particular, and this new phenomenon of like speculation on Bitcoin has demonstrated to me, like I used to think that, of course, people care about decentralization. Of course, people care about permissionlessness and trustlessness, but we've seen empirically that like these massive user adoption waves have not really been, they don't seem to really care about that, at least right now. And my thought is like, well, they don't care about it until they do. What do you say about this? What are your thoughts on like user behavior and trying to like convince users why it's important to care about these things?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big difference between user demand and actually ideology, I would say. So the reason we are into Bitcoin is we ideologically wise believe there should be decentralized money in the world. That doesn't mean there's a direct user demand, except, for example, when you get thrown off your traditional bank account, then you will have a direct user demand, and that could be for stablecoins or for Bitcoin direct itself. Now, what ordinals are is a direct user demand in essence, right? People want to do something, they want to like join a community, they want to buy this ordinal, and so they are going to do that because it solves an actual user demand. And so I think it's two very separate aspects that you're seeing. I think people will still longer term support the ideology that they believe in. But in the short term, if there's user demand, people will also do that.
So that kind of leads into what I would say like the meat of our discussion, which is this idea of permissionless and permissionlessness. And I had a tweet last week, and we've talked about it, and a lot of people have talked about this type of this line of thinking, which is it feels that Bitcoin may be at a crossroads where on one path we become, the majority of Bitcoin is held through custodians, which requires permission to take back and use as a sovereign way, and the other is not very clear or defined, but I would assume it is a more sovereign Bitcoin user. Describe to me at a high level like what this divergence you see, or this kind of describe to me like what you see us sitting at right now.
Absolutely. I think we are at a massive crossroads at the moment in Bitcoin. And I think we cannot be lazy here and just sit back and enjoy the price rising, because it's actually quite a dangerous moment. There is now more than 1 million Bitcoin in the ETFs. There's 400,000 in MicroStrategy. And a lot of people are basically going to buy, a lot of organizations and governments are going to buy more of that Bitcoin. And so what in 4 or 5 years from now, maybe the next cycle, there's actually 5 to 10 million Bitcoin actually no longer in people's hands, but it's just like in ETFs and others. At that moment, you basically no longer have any on-chain transactions. And you can already see that today. Like if you look at the transaction fees, who would have predicted 10 years ago that the transaction fees would be at this level? So there's basically almost no demand for that sovereign ownership. And so if 5 to 10 million Bitcoin ends up in ETFs, in central banks and others, what we have created is just a new version of gold. And gold has failed in our current society. But that might be where we end up. What if instead of central banks holding gold, they will just hold Bitcoin? And you will still have all the money printing. You will still have the increased inflation. You will still have all the downsides of the current financial system that we live in. And so I would consider Bitcoin at that moment failed. I want to live in the world where Bitcoin is half of every transaction in the world, where you basically have a hyper-Bitcoinized world. And so I can see these two futures very clearly now, and it's actually becoming quite a risk. And I feel a lot of people and building in the space should be more aware of that. I think you also have the Hal Finney saying in the beginning days, okay, now we all gotten more rich with our Bitcoin. We better put it to a good use. And so I think one of the ways we can actually make a difference is creating that on-chain demand. In my mind, the way to get Bitcoin back on-chain is creating on-chain demand for it. And so, for example, with a Botanix as a layer 2, we're hyper-focused on that. There's a lot of applications that Bitcoiners would want to use, but they're not using it for it today. And so you want to create some kind of demand that people actually sell their ETFs and actually get their Bitcoin back on-chain. And I believe we can do that by creating those on-chain applications. I think when you look at it, this cycle, very few people will come on-chain, I believe. Most people will everyone who comes new into the space, they will go to their brokerage account and buy a Bitcoin ETF, which means they don't experience what it means to transact on-chain. They don't know what it means to hold your own private key. And so they'll never go through this educational cycle that you actually need for the moment it actually happens. And so this cycle will be a very interesting one because nobody will come on-chain.
So, I mean, I've shared your concerns about this. I'll try to play the critic a bit and try to push back with some of the common refutes that I hear. One which is, well, you seem to be touching on a bit of the mining death spiral FUD that Bitcoin miners won't be able to pay for their operations because there's not transaction fees. And yet we see year after year, cycle after cycle, Bitcoin miners are able to stay in business because the price of Bitcoin keeps going up. Are we to assume that that's if transaction fees continue to be a meager part of rewards, that Bitcoin just goes up forever, like Michael Saylor says, and that's just how we pay for mining infinitely? What's your response to the mining fee spiral or death spiral FUD?
Yeah, I don't really believe in the spiral, that mining spiral FUD. I think the point of the low transaction fees was basically more to show that there's no on-chain demand for sovereign ownership. So little transactions basically means that nobody is coming on-chain anymore. Nobody is actually going and withdrawing their Bitcoin from their Coinbase account. Because like with an ETF, you cannot even do that, right? And so that was the main point I wanted to make. And I don't believe in that mining spiral. Before the whole budget runs out, it's year 2140. There's a lot that can happen between now and then.
Another criticism I hear is we have these scaling solutions. We have eCash, we have Lightning, we have other pre-signed transaction with coordinator type scaling solutions. That's fine. People can self-custody those assets. What are your thoughts about, we don't need, people have all the options they need today. what's your thought about that line of thinking?
Well, two separate answers on that. I think we have not seen product market fit in those solutions that you just mentioned, meaning with product market fit that it solves an actual user demand. I think the most adoption we've seen there is ideological adoption. Like, I use Lightning because I want to use Lightning, not because it solves an actual customer problem for me today, right? I pay in Lightning, for example, in PubKey, but that's not because it's the easiest and the best user, or it solves my user demand to do that. I do that because of ideological reasons. And so I don't think we've seen actually adoption of actual product market fit products that create user demand on chain. However, we have seen that in the rest of crypto. So I think the big example for me is stablecoins. So we still don't really have product market fit of stablecoins on Bitcoin or any Bitcoin scaling solution. And so when you think about stablecoins, it is bringing way more people on chain than anything else. Like, it has reached absolute product market fit for a lot of people in the rest of the world. It is the way today that actually people save and secure their money. Like, if you're actually at risk of having your bank account seized, those people will buy stablecoins. And so I absolutely believe stablecoins should be a funnel into Bitcoin. It is the first touch point that a lot of people have, how to manage your own private key, how to actually be in control of your assets. But that is unfortunately not on Bitcoin. And so there's a lot of applications that have actually reached product market fit, but they're not available on any of those scaling solutions, or they might be available, but then they don't have the adoption. They haven't reached that product market fit yet.
And this is a great direction to go, because I don't talk very much about stablecoins on this show. But, because again, one of the criticisms is like, well, I mean, they can just do that on Tron. Like, why would somebody want to use a stablecoin on Bitcoin? It's slower, or are we talking about stablecoins on different abstractions or layers of Bitcoin? Like, why should a user care that a stablecoin is on Bitcoin?
Yeah, there's, again, depending on different customer segmentation, this user demand will fall into different categories. For a lot of Bitcoiners, I know maybe some of them would want to play the cycles. Let's say they want to sell their Bitcoin, but you don't want to do that on a central exchange. So why not swap your Bitcoin into stablecoins, right? Maybe in the next year or something, and then swap it back when you think you're in the bear market. And so that's permissionless, that's censorship resistant, and you cannot really do that today unless you go from Bitcoin to Ethereum and then all the way back, right? And so that is a use case for, I think, more of the Bitcoiners that have not been active in the rest of crypto. And then you can talk about a second customer segment. For example, okay, I'm someone transacting on Tron today. I'm using stablecoins on Tron. Why would I do that on Bitcoin? And that is a very good question. There's actually no reason for it. But I think that's the main problem. Like, those stablecoins should be a funnel into Bitcoin, and it's not today. Like, stablecoins will probably gain way more adoption over the next few years. And ideally, the new inflow of people, of user base, come to Bitcoin. And that's how they learn about Bitcoin, and that's how they see like the vision of Bitcoin. Because stablecoins in the end are still tied to the money printing of the U.S. government, and so you convincing someone to basically move their stablecoins from Tron to a Bitcoin scaling solution will be really hard. But what we can do is basically creating an initial product market fit, an initial flywheel, so that a new funnel of a lot of new people basically come to Bitcoin. In the end, what a lot of people will want to do, and even the people transacting on Tron, is eventually keep their savings on the Bitcoin base layer. Like, whatever you want to do, if you want to borrow stablecoins against your Bitcoin, if you want to send stablecoins, if you want to sell stablecoins back to Bitcoin and the other way around, eventually you want to increase your cold storage stack of Bitcoin on the base layer. And so the easier you have that funnel directly back to the Bitcoin base layer and your cold wallet, the easier the user experience will be for everyone. And so I think that solves an actual user demand.
What are some other like product market fits? Like I feel that Bitcoiners are pretty like comically oblivious, or at least many of the ideological Bitcoiners are comically oblivious because they don't look out at the rest of crypto, or they say those things which have product market fit are immoral or illogical. But besides stablecoins, there are a few others which have multi-year track records of product market fit. What are those in your mind?
Yeah, I would say against those Bitcoiners, they're actually, I would call them more bearish on Bitcoin, because I believe in a fully hyper-Bitcoinized world, and that means every transaction in the world, meaning if you want to buy stocks, if you want to take loans, I want all of that to be on-chain, permissionless, open, 24/7, open source for everyone in the world. And so I think some of the applications that we've seen is, for example, Polymarket. Polymarket with the latest election was very popular. I'm quite sure that almost everyone had a look at Polymarket, and it is built on Polygon, which is a Ethereum sidechain, or an Ethereum layer 2. And so it actually funneled people into Polygon instead of Bitcoin. And so you would have been great if that Polymarket was actually built on a Bitcoin scaling solution. I think that it would have been great. Outside of that, what I think has reached product market fit is perpetuals. So I'm sure quite a lot of people would want to trade around every once in a while, and maybe they do it on a central exchange like Kraken or a Coinbase. But if you can do it on chain, where nobody can basically ban or block your account, and you can immediately withdraw back your trades, where you go maybe like 2x leverage or 3x leverage back to the Bitcoin base chain. Like, a lot of people trade to make more Bitcoin, right? And so most of those applications live like, for example, on Arbitrum. So I think perpetual DEXs have absolutely reached product market fit. Besides that, I think borrowing and lending protocols, like you basically I don't want to sell my Bitcoin stack, right? But let's say I want to buy a car, or you want to buy anything in this world. You basically borrow a little bit of stable coins against your Bitcoin holdings. And the most trustless way to do that is a lending and a borrowing protocol. For example, Aave on Ethereum existed for like 4 or 5 years, I think, as TVL of around 20 billion. And so it's a very trusted model. But the problem is you need to do that with a wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum, and you kind of want to do that on a Bitcoin scaling solution. But borrowing and lending is a perfect example of one of the use cases that I think is very powerful. You basically don't have to sell your Bitcoin stack. You borrow a bit of stable coins against your stack, and you use that in the real world. And so the interesting part is that all of these applications can basically work together, and you create this like flywheel where maybe one day you want to use Polymarket, the second day you want to borrow against your stable coins. And so ideally you all have that on chain on a Bitcoin scaling solution, and that's actual demand that will bring people back to Bitcoin. Yeah. And there's much more than that. I mean, we've talked about ordinals, NFTs, and the further down the curve you go, there's a lot. I mean, you can even have the meme coin casinos, which is also will be a part of current society. I mean, if you look at current society and you actually believe that Bitcoin will be present in every transaction, it also means in Las Vegas, if you want to go gamble in the casino, you'll pay with Bitcoin, right? And so even that has reached its product market fit with a subset of people.
I like to imagine that, we're only 15 years into this crazy experiment phenomenon that is Bitcoin. And we already have a handful of very strong product market fits emerging. What do another 15 years produce? I would also say that, if the majority of Bitcoin and crypto is custodianed and on-chain activity is low, then that dramatically reduces the probability of future real use cases being discovered, and future product market fits being discovered. So this would be like I hear a lot of people say, well, like, these custodians, they'll send the price of Bitcoin soaring, get your mom and dad to buy the ETF. I want my mom and dad to buy the ETF. But like, hyper-Bitcoinization is much more than just the price of Bitcoin going to $10 million US. It is about the whole system, as you say. My question for you is, like, I feel that a lot of users and Bitcoiners don't actually, they may not agree that we're at a crossroads, but I think that's probably downstream of them even realizing that Bitcoin is currently trending towards a more permission system. Do you think that this is an Bitcoiner awareness issue, or do you think there is perhaps a bigger driver such as complacency?
Yeah, there's definitely complacency happening. I fully believe that, and that's why we're basically doing this podcast, talking half about Bitcoin being at the crossroads. This is a call to action. I think, with a lot of the Bitcoin in the ETFs and going into central banks and going into governments and going to company balance sheets. That's 100% a risk, and I think there's a lot of people working in the space on solutions that can reach product market fit. And ideally, I think initial phase price rises, everybody cheers on the Bitcoin ETFs. But the second step is realizing, wait, this is actually might be a danger. Like now you have like these big holders that start to get a lot of power, and so you are getting more and more into like a permission system, because these are becoming big stakeholders. Like Blackrock will become a big voice in this space maybe in a few years when they custody a few 100,000 or a few million Bitcoin. They will have a big voice, and so I think the call to action is more to all the Bitcoiners that realize this and want to live in a hyper-Bitcoinized world. Let's try to see if we can actually convince people to get their Bitcoin out of the ETFs and on-chain. And the only way we can do that is by actually using these applications, using the applications that have been built, and basically creating that flywheel and create this user demand that people eventually will want to have. Because I mean, if I'm slowly really believing into Bitcoin and all my Bitcoin is in ETFs, the next step will be, maybe I want to borrow against my Bitcoin ETFs. And in a traditional financial world, there's so many hurdles to actually do that. Well, then you basically see that, on chain, I can just like borrow stablecoins against that. And so that will basically convince people to sell their Bitcoin ETFs, go on chain, and actually self-custody.
So you mentioned, this is a topic I touch on a lot in this show, which is this idea of Bitcoin stakeholders. And you mentioned that like in a future where BlackRock has hundreds of thousands or a million or so Bitcoin, they become a large stakeholder. Like, why is that important? Maybe if I were a Bitcoiner who I pride myself in running my node, and I think, well, that's fine. My node will enforce the consensus rules I want, and I don't have to worry if BlackRock has all this Bitcoin. Why does that matter in the Bitcoin consensus process?
I think that's a great question, and it goes really into like very interesting aspects of just consensus. I think from a pure engineering perspective, it doesn't matter. They have no power, right? I run my own node. I make my own. I follow my own consensus rules, right? But then again, you have what's called human weakness. Like even in today's world, the reason we have hedge funds buying a majority share of companies is because they basically can buy their influence. And so when BlackRock has a few million Bitcoin and starts putting out messages into the world, a lot of people will read that, and a lot of people will basically be impacted by that. And in the end, a lot of consensus are still done by people. And so BlackRock can start like threatening, can start like doing a bunch of different things. They won't have the actual power, but the actual power eventually lies with people, and people have their human weaknesses. And so it will definitely have an influence, whether you like it or not. People will be influenced what BlackRock will have to say when they own a few million Bitcoin. But that's a good thing in the end about Bitcoin. It's still a set of rules run by different nodes, but it will make upgrading, for example, or like adding in covenants, like much, much harder.
So you brought up the topic of covenants or upgrading, and this is, again, a topic I talk about a ton here publicly on the podcast. I'm a huge proponent of forward discussion on these topics. What do you think about Bitcoin soft forks and covenants? What do you personally want to see happen in the current soft fork discussion?
Yeah, I think from a Botanix standpoint, we've always had we'll look at the market and follow the experts in the space. But I think one of the best arguments I heard at the Up Next conference is we need to get into a cadence of soft forking. Like one of the big risks we have right now is like, what if we don't really know how to soft fork anymore after a while, right? Like, what if this quantum thing ends up happening? I don't want to add on the quantum FUD, but I mean, we need to get in a cadence of actually soft forking. And I follow the consensus. I mean, CTV has a lot of support. Upcat, of course. We have TX Hash. These are like great designs that have been in the space for a while. A lot of really smart people have looked at it, and so I feel very supportive of those protocols. Yeah, of those covenants. I think generally anything that helps the expressivity will make a lot of the scaling solutions more secure. You basically have a bigger toolbox you can play with.
Where do you think the majority of the pushback comes from in the soft fork discussion? Like, we've had several soft forks before, and I think a lot of us, myself included, see a lot of the criticism and pushback from like tenured Bitcoin developer voices in the space. And we kind of wonder where it comes from, because they, if I can characterize broadly, there are not, I don't see as good technical criticisms of some of these proposals, particularly CTV, for example. And they seem to be more social criticisms of, we don't like how it's been explained. We don't like who's pushed it. We don't see a reason for these upgrades or these changes. Where do you think the pushback comes from?
Yeah, I think the pushback comes from all different sides. Every person has their own reasons why they might not want to like a certain covenant proposal, and it could be like a social reason. Maybe they don't like the person. It could be like just scary. Every change is always scary. Like there's unknowns in there, and that is absolutely fair. But it's also scary not to do upgrades. So that helps on both. I mean, that sword cuts on both sides. So I think it depends a lot of on a lot of different people. I think it's hard to actually create consensus in a space that's extremely decentralized. It basically shows how decentralized Bitcoin is, but over time, I'm confident people will get to consensus. In the end, it's if everyone is convinced it is for the better of the space, then there's only one way forward, of course.
So I want to wrap this up, kind of coming back to Botanix. You guys have been building this for a long time, from the white paper a couple of years ago to pulling together a team. What does Botanix look like in 2025 in the context, in the light of our discussion that we just had?
Yeah. That's a very good question. Well, I absolutely hope that with Botanix, we can create that user demand to bring the Bitcoin back on chain, as we call it. There's a few applications that we are laser focused on. We talked about the stablecoins. I absolutely think stablecoins are onboarding way more people into like private keys, etc., than anything else in the world. And I want to bring that to Bitcoin. I think stablecoins should be a funnel into Bitcoin. Besides that, very focused on borrowing and lending. I think that's an absolutely big use case that a lot of Bitcoiners have actual demand for. You don't want to sell your Bitcoin and you have everyday expenses in fiat. And so you want to borrow a small stack of stablecoins against your Bitcoin. And that needs to be on a Bitcoin scaling solution. So we are really looking forward to actually creating that user demand with applications that have already reached product market fit, doing that into Bitcoin so that you can easily withdraw your Bitcoin back to the base chain, to your cold wallet, bring use cases that hopefully basically convinces people to sell their ETFs, buy the Bitcoin, and use it in any of the applications live on Botanix. That's hopefully what I see happening in 2025. And this is also a call to action to all the Bitcoiners that want to believe in this hyper-Bitcoinized world. Like, you can help us make this happen. Like, use these applications, try out these use cases. Tell your friends about it. Tell your friends to sell their ETFs and bring their Bitcoin in their cold wallet, bring their Bitcoin on chain. That's how we actually make this happen. So I'm excited about 2025. I think good things will happen. I think hopefully we have reached the pendulum of the ETFs of the governments, and the pendulum by the end of 2025 starts to swing back, where the main narrative is like, keep control of your own keys, get out of the ETFs, come back on chain. That would be a great success for me and Botanix.
Very well said, Willem. Thank you so much for coming on Bitcoin Season 2. And again, thanks for putting Botanix behind us. We really appreciate that. I will see you next year on chain. Peace.
Absolutely. Thanks, John.